What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. So excited to bring to you this week's edition of Next Pats because we're bringing in our good friend Tyler Dunne of GoLongTD.com, his fantastic Substack. He just released a 3-part series called The House of Dysfunction. It focuses on the Chicago Bears and Caleb Williams and their process of landing on Caleb Williams as the face of their franchise. So many juicy nuggets in there. He spoke to 32 different sources. This piece, 3 parts, about 30,000 words in total. And in the process of doing all that exhaustive reporting, the reason we wanted to have Tyler on the show here this week is because he was able to acquire a lot of Drake Maye intel. Remember, at one point in time, Drake Maye and Caleb Williams were considered to be 1 and 2 or 2 and 1 at the top of that year's draft class at that quarterback position. So how did the Bears see Drake Maye? I think you're going to be surprised to hear Tyler on that. How does Tyler see Drake Maye progressing from where he's at after just putting together the best game of his young pro career? And where does Tyler see Drake Maye rank with not only Caleb Williams, but also the other quarterbacks in that draft class? It looks like a loaded quarterback draft class, but we'll see how this thing shakes out after year 2, even year 3. We will continue to judge, to gauge. But Caleb Williams, Drake Maye, J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels, of course, and Michael Penix. It looks like a really talented group. Is there a chance that Drake Maye ends up being considered at the top of that list within the next year or 2? It's a tremendous conversation with Tyler. Before we get to it, I did want to share with you some Drake Maye stats that I think might make your eyebrows shoot through the roof. And it's only 2 games. But let's just give you a little bit of an update on where Drake Maye stands. How about among that 2024 quarterback draft class in terms of EPA per dropback? He's number 1 among those 6 first-round quarterbacks. He's number 1 in adjusted net yards per attempt. He's number 1 in adjusted completion percentage. So through 2 games, at or near the top of the list. How about in terms of over the breadth of the entire NFL? So let's lump in all of these quarterbacks, even the greats. Drake Maye isn't right there with some of those names, but he's hovering around that territory. He's 7th in total EPA behind only Lamar Jackson, Daniel Jones, who's having a tremendous first couple of games, Josh Allen, Jared Goff, Jordan Love, and Justin Herbert. And to me, where we've seen Drake Maye's growth is when he's blitzed, when he's been pressured. He has been excellent through 2 games. He's 7th in completion percentage when blitzed. He's 8th in completion percentage over expected. So how accurate is he? He's in the top 10 when blitzed. And he's 8th in quarterback rating, almost a 120 quarterback rating when blitzed. That's phenomenal stuff for a second-year quarterback in his first year in Josh McDaniels' system. When he's under pressure, he's 8th in EPA per dropback. He's 5th in yards per attempt. So we have seen clearly some real growth from the Patriots' young quarterback. It's just a question of whether or not he's going to be able to maintain that growth and be able to consistently get better and better over the course of his second year. All right, enough in the way of numbers. Let's get to our conversation with Tyler Dunne. So great to have Tyler Dunne here with us at Gillette Stadium, gracing us with his presence. Tyler, you did a phenomenal job on that 3-part series, House of Dysfunction, and I know it's centered on Chicago and what's going on with their quarterback, Caleb Williams. But in your process of reporting, you learned so much about Drake Maye as well and the pre-draft process and what people thought of him. What did you learn about the Patriots quarterback as you were going through the process of putting this piece together?
Honestly, I felt bad for Drake Maye, the Patriots quarterback. It blew my mind how the team that owned the number 1 pick, the Chicago Bears, had no process, had no debate, no discussion. And not only that, Phil, they literally laughed Drake Maye off of the screen. I mean, Ryan Poles, the GM for the Bears, is manipulating the draft process in a way where they're showing Drake Maye's worst moments in college first to kind of plant that inside the mind of scouts. So it's kind of subliminal. As a scout kind of described it to me, he thinks he's being sneaky, but there were people in that room who liked Drake Maye, loved Drake Maye, and weren't happy about it. And in fact, one of those head scouts, Chris White, from what I was told, stood up and said, "We're not being fair to the kid. This isn't right. Let's show some positivity here. Let's show some of his good moments." And then it got tense between Ryan Poles and this Chris White. It went a little back and forth, and then eventually they end up laughing again. A pack of hyenas is how it was described to me by somebody in that room in terms of Ryan Poles, the GM, wanting to get a consensus on Caleb Williams at the expense of not really even considering Drake Maye, who may end up being the better quarterback of the two.
It sounds like from what you've reported, he just wanted to shoot down the possibility of anybody even hinting at the fact that they should think about drafting another player at that position. Do you feel like now, because this reporting is fresh, and so, I know we're only 2 games into the 2025 season here, and Drake Maye just had maybe the best game of his career. Do those people know they may have made a mistake? Do they look at that process now and say, boy, we screwed that up. This kid was in a situation in New England that wasn't ideal in terms of the quarterback ecosystem around him, and they didn't win many games. But I think it's fair to say league people that I've spoken to at least have seen throughout the course of his rookie season and now early in this season real promise from Drake Maye. So did you get the sense that now there is any sort of regret on Chicago's end?
I don't think they feel that way. I think that the people who believed in Caleb Williams, starting with Ryan Poles, they're going to go down with Caleb Williams, whether it's ego, whatever the case may be. You made a really good point, though, because this was brought up to me by a scout in that room who did not like where these discussions were going because there really wasn't a discussion. He said with Drake Maye, it was kind of framed around he's running for his life, awkward arm angles, throwing on the run, the spiral, the ball being off because of what you just mentioned. Like, he didn't have a lot of talent around him at the end. He had to run around for his life, and he actually made a lot of plays where then it gets to Jaden Daniels, and kind of the reverse argument was made. Yeah, but he had all these 5 stars with him. He had all this talent. It's like, which way do you want it here? I think it was just they were so drunk on Caleb Williams that if you had an opinion about anybody else that kind of deviated from that, you were either shouted down or shunned, and put yourself in the position of these scouts. Like, you've got a family to feed. You want your boss to like you. Right? And he is a boss that prefers yes men, yes women. And I think that they realized that, and that's kind of how it became this groupthink exercise of never really thinking about Drake Maye as their potential savior at the position. Now, have they changed their? I guess we'll see. Right? I think this is the year. If Caleb Williams fails with Ben Johnson, if he fails with this offense that is going to put him in ideal situations, play in and play out, and Drake Maye does what we saw in week 2, in week 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, and then there will be regret, and it'll be obvious to everybody.
When you look at this quarterback class, right, and it was loaded, right, 6 quarterbacks, first round. When you look at them now, Ty, where do you think Drake Maye would stack? Where would he stack in your opinion? Where do you think the league would put him? Again, it's still so early in all these guys' careers, and it's not to say that Caleb Williams is going to fail or that Drake Maye is going to be great or J.J. McCarthy, because he had a rough game the other night, is not going to be a good player. So there's still so much to be proven. But where do you think Drake Maye would land if you had to stack him right now?
There is a scout that I quoted in part 2 of this series who believes Drake Maye is the best of the bunch. And he goes right through. He's everything that you want. He's got the arm. He's got the athleticism. He's got the mobility. But more than anything, he's got leadership to him. Like, he walks into a room and people gravitate toward him because it's natural. It's not forced. In a way that I think Caleb Williams has tried to lead the Bears. It's a little inauthentic in that situation. I'd still go Jaden Daniels number 1, and I think throughout the league, that's the opinion that you'll get. In fact, there's a GM for one team who's like asking me, Phil, he's like, did the Bears really consider Jaden? Because we would have given up a lot of first-round picks for him, and they never really did. So right now, I'd probably go Jaden Daniels number 1. He has all of those intangibles. He was doing the virtual reality stuff back to the LSU days. He still does it now. But I'd take Drake Maye right after him. And maybe he does end up being the best of the bunch because not only does he have the physical ability, the athleticism, but there is, I think a theme of this series is you can be talented. Caleb Williams is unbelievably talented. But to excel at the quarterback position, you need more than arm talent. You need more than physical ability. You need to be somebody who's going to pour in hours and hours and hours of film work on your own time without the nudge of a coach. And Drake Maye strikes me as that kind of personality.
And that, to me, I think would be the biggest takeaway. If I'm running an NFL front office and I'm reading your series, that to me would be the biggest reminder. And if I'm not already doing it, I would start pouring into it even more, would be figure out who these guys are as people. Yeah. And we know teams spend so many resources trying to figure that out. It didn't feel like that was necessarily the case in Chicago. But to me, what more can teams do, in your opinion, to make sure that they don't miss, whether it's quarterback or any other spot. We talk here in New England about the receiver position all the time. And they drafted 2 guys last year who I think, as in terms of football character, were not what they were expecting. Certainly Jalen Polk, second-round pick, falls into that category. Javon Baker in the 4th round is a little bit more of a risk. So it applies across the board at positions, but especially at quarterback. How can they not screw this up moving forward from what you've learned?
I think that when you're in these draft meetings, have vibrant debate. Every voice should be heard. And I've talked to other GMs about this, and they say, yeah, in our room, we would talk about those red flags that Caleb Williams had. Very real red flags when it comes to work ethic, his style of play. Like, is this backyard style of play going to work in the NFL? You watch USC game in and game out, it's fun as hell. But, does that really apply to the NFL? Can you play within structure? Like, ask those hard questions. They didn't. Like, the Notre Dame game, they didn't watch it. They didn't analyze it. They didn't scrutinize it. And then, of course, the medical. That's a big part of our series as well. And, prospects that are getting drafted in the 7th round, you're asking very hard, difficult questions when it comes to medical. Caleb Williams, there weren't those discussions had. So I think that, number one, you need to create an atmosphere where it's okay for anybody to speak up. Whether you're an area scout, whether you're a coordinator, a director, an assistant coach that's involved in this process, like, you should feel like you have a concern, you want to raise a debate, you should be able to speak it. I talked to people in those draft meetings with the Chicago Bears. They said, like, we felt like we couldn't speak up. Because if you speak up, now you've got a bullseye on your chest, and you might get fired. Because it's clear what Ryan Poles wants. It was clear in December that it was Caleb Williams all the way, and it never really changed. So, yeah, the one person who did speak up, like I said, was Chris White. And he was sticking up for Drake Maye. And Chris White isn't there anymore. He works for the Washington Commanders.
It's really interesting. And as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about this from a Patriots standpoint. And, we've heard stories for years, Tyler, about Patriots draft meetings. And I think those discussions were had. And guys like Nick Caserio would be open to having those discussions and hearing from his scouts. But then maybe on draft day, the big guy would come in over the top. And he's going to take the guy that he really wants.
Which
and so
is fine, right?
You get
do
that
need
discussion.
That final decider,
you
for
do.
sure.
You do, but I think there were guys that were part of the process who didn't feel like their part of the process was necessarily valued all that much. Last question I want to ask you. When it comes to the Patriots and their ability to develop Drake Maye, because now that you've seen and you've taken us inside the house of dysfunction in Chicago, and again, we'll see how that plays out, but you've also had the ability to see up close, being a Western New York guy, how the Bills have been able to draft and develop the guy who, in my opinion, is the best quarterback in football right now in Josh Allen. Scale of 1 to 10, how are the Patriots doing? How have they set this up for their young quarterback in order for him to have success?
I tell you what, it's eerily similar, I think, to Josh Allen in terms of it wasn't in year one, you just saw glimpses, flashes, leaping over Anthony Barr, maybe a stiff arm in another game, a good throw against the Jaguars, and they won 6 games, and nobody really knew for sure. But there were little signs to suggest this is headed a good direction. And then they're able to sign Cole Beasley, sign John Brown in year 2. The Patriots kind of made some subtle moves. They probably would have liked to have signed another receiver, but they did improve in year 2 for Drake Maye. And then year 3 is when they make the big move for Steph Diggs. And Steph Diggs is in his prime, and he helps Josh Allen reach an entire new level with Brian Dable as a coach, pushing him. Maybe year 3 is when the Patriots can convince, a stud receiver, hey, we know the taxes stink out here. We know the weather isn't that great, but you got Drake Maye. And that, look, it's serious. It's a real thing that Brandon Beane in Buffalo has to work through with free agents, is convincing top-end talent to play in Western New York. It is not fun living. I mean, trust me, you get that snow blower out 5 times a year, and you got to use a hairdryer to melt the snow just to clear it out so it will function. It's not fun. But if you got a great quarterback, if you've got a Hall of Fame level quarterback, everybody will want to play for you. So if Drake Maye just keeps ascending, like say they make the playoffs this year, and he's a big reason why, everybody's going to want to play for the Patriots. And I think this is most important, Phil, a coach, personality-wise, who fits with Drake Maye. Brian Dable and Josh Allen, their personalities were perfect together. Dable could get on him, could be fiery, could challenge him, and Josh Allen was able to accept it and use it for good. Josh McDaniels is a hard coach. And it seems, you tell me, I think Drake Maye's got a personality to accept that hard coaching.
It does feel that way. From what we know of Drake Maye to this point, he would be, in my opinion, more open to that style of coaching than most just turned 23-year-olds. So we'll have to see how it plays out, both with Josh McDaniels and Mike Vrabel, both hard coaches.
Right.
Tyler Dunne, one of the best in our country covering the NFL. Thanks so much for being with us on Next Pats, buddy.
Thanks, Phil.
Welcome back to Next Pats. It's time for our Who's Next segment, where we're giving you a handful of names that you need to keep an eye on when you find yourself on the couch on a Saturday wondering who the Patriots might be looking to draft in 2026. I know it might feel a little early. It's never too early for draft talk. You know it. I know it. And the name we're starting with today is a name you need to know. It's Chris Brazzell II from Tennessee, 6'5", 200 pounds. If you happen to catch that Tennessee-Georgia game last week, you know that Brazzell absolutely lit it up. We're talking 6 catches on 6 targets for 177 yards and 3 touchdowns, almost 30 yards per catch. This guy's an explosive playmaking machine. He is the next in a long line of straight-line fast Tennessee Volunteers at the receiver position. But to me, what makes Brazzell so exciting is that you see in a game like the one he had against Georgia, the ability to adjust to the football in the air. He doesn't just have to run by you and then run underneath a 9 route. He can adjust and make a contested catch. You also saw a little route running nuance when it came to his ability to decelerate and stop on a dime. When you see him run an out route, it doesn't take him 5 or 6 steps to slow that big frame down and make that cut. It's 1 step, plant, and he's gone to the sideline while the corner is bailing and hoping he doesn't beat him deep. That, to me, is just the kind of receiver the Patriots need. They are still lacking that true X, that true vertical threat down the field, and Brazzell looks like he could be an option early in next year's draft. He's caught 20 of his 24 targets for over 300 yards. He's averaging 18.2 yards per catch with 5 total touchdowns, according to Pro Football Focus. 5th in receiving grade, 6th in yards per route run. And I know that Tennessee offense, it's a little funky. It ain't anything like he's going to see in the NFL, but he looks like the kind of athlete who could translate no matter what system he's asked to run as a pro. All right, next up for Who's Next, let's flip it over to the other side of the ball and talk about the cornerback position, and let's specifically look at Clemson corner Avion Terrell. Now, if that name, Terrell, and the school Clemson sound familiar to you, it should. A.J. Terrell is Avion's older brother. He was a second-team All-Pro back in 2021, one of the best young corners in football right now for the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Avion isn't quite as big as his brother. He's 5'11", 181 pounds, but he plays bigger than his listed size. If you go back and you watch him last week against Georgia Tech, mixing it up at the line of scrimmage as a blitzer. He's got 2 forced fumbles already early in the 2025 college football season, and I think that's indicative of the style with which Terrell plays. He's a physical cat, and in a Mike Vrabel defense, potentially, as a 2026, potentially, NFL draft pick, that's the kind of style that I could see the Patriots head coach really loving. Playing downhill, being physical, playing bigger than your frame. So the question to me with Terrell is, at that size, does he have to play inside or could he live outside? I think he could. I think he's big enough. 5'11" to me, if that's truly his size, we'll see come draft season where the official measurements come in at. But if he's 5'11", go ahead and feel comfortable with him playing at that outside spot, outside the numbers. And to me, the reason you might even be interested in somebody like Terrell, who could be a first-round pick, is because you're not sure what the long-term future is at that position for your organization here in New England. Carlton Davis, is he the long-term answer opposite Christian Gonzalez? You'd like to think that Christian Gonzalez is going to get his payday here in New England and be here for a long, long time as their true number 1. But would you be willing to invest with a day 1 or early day 2 pick in somebody like Avion Terrell to make sure that Gonzalez has that running mate alongside him for the foreseeable future? To me, in terms of the fit with Mike Vrabel and what he wants and the style of play that Avion Terrell brings to the field on a weekly basis for Clemson, that would make a lot of sense in 2026 and beyond. The last name that we have to bring up is a lineman. We're going to try to bring you linemen on a consistent basis. I know, not the sexiest thing in the world to watch, but you always need them, especially at that tackle position. And the lineman we're talking about this week is out of Northwestern, Caleb Tiernan. Now, in terms of Pro Football Focus grades, he's checking in at 7th with his overall grade. That includes both run blocking and pass blocking. And he was helped significantly this past week based on what he did against Oregon. A clean sheet and no easy task because he was going up against, at times, potential first-round pick out of Oregon, Mateo Uiagalelei. All kinds of physical talent there, so you got a chance to watch two behemoths go at it. And Tiernan held his own. He might not be the most athletic tackle in this year's class, but at 6'7", 325 pounds, all kinds of size, all kinds of power to be able to hold up at the point of attack, and enough in the way of athleticism to be able to keep people away from his quarterback, even when he's going up against future first-round picks. So keep an eye on Tiernan. Is he a day one guy? Is he closer to a day two guy? If he continues to put performances together like the one he did in week 3, he could hear his name called in the first round. All right, let's dive into the mailbag here. We're going to get to your questions. Robbie Dudley has one. He says, Pop Douglas has just 8 targets in the last 2 games. Is he being phased out of the Patriots offense? If so, who benefits? And is Maye struggling to hit him because of his size? All fair questions, Robbie. I do just want to point out, last week against the Dolphins, the game plan was not a Pop Douglas-centric kind of game plan. When your plan is to run the football, to get under center, to have a lot of 2 tight end packages on the field, that in all likelihood is going to mean less work for Pop Douglas. We saw him in training camp. The ability is real to separate, to generate yards after the catch because he can be so slippery with the football in his hands. It's all real. But maybe in training camp, we were a little bit misled by the number of pass plays we saw. For the most part, even in the fully padded practices, you're going to see more throws than runs in training camp settings. And so we saw a lot of Pop Douglas. But in a run-heavy game like the one the Patriots just had against the Dolphins, that's not the game plan for him. He's 5'8". He doesn't even weigh 200 pounds. They're not going to ask him to dig out a safety they would for Mac Hollins. So in games like that one, in all likelihood, you're going to see less Douglas. And I talked to him about that this week, and he understands it. Is he frustrated? A little, because he wants to contribute. He wants to get his hands on the football. He wants to compete. That part makes sense. He only played 15 snaps against Miami. But here's what he told me. I talked to him one-on-one in the Patriots locker room earlier this week. He said, for an athlete who loves the game, that part is frustrating. Yeah, but man, at the end of the day, I'm blessed. We got the dub. That would be very selfish of me to come in here angry after a win. I can't be mad. We got the dub. I did play a little, but we came out with a divisional win. He also told me that the coaches talked to him about why he wasn't seeing the football as much. He has 8 targets, as you mentioned, through 2 games now. He only has a handful of catches. It's not the kind of stat line we expected to see, right? 3 grabs for 6 yards through 2 games. I think you'll see more when the pass-heavy plans of attack start to show up more for the Patriots. Could be as early as this weekend. If they're in a situation where they have to throw it a lot of 3rd and longs, or maybe they're behind, by a score or 2, that's when you'll see more Pop Douglas. All right, next up here is Kyle at PatsFanCT. Down the road, he asks, next year or the year after, when the roster can be rebuilt, can the Patriots get to a championship with Josh McDaniels as their OC? I would say, Kyle, definitely, to answer your question. I know when he's gotten to championships in the past, he's happened to have the greatest quarterback of all time running the plays that he's calling. But to me, Josh McDaniels is the most redeeming piece to the offensive situation, to the offensive ecosystem surrounding Drake Maye right now. He's shown it. He has all kinds of experience, clearly, but in a variety of different types of offenses. He has shown his adaptability. And to me, that's what I want to point out about his performance in week 2. What did we see in Miami? A lot of West Coast elements to this Patriots offensive attack. And to me, that makes sense. You have a quarterback who can bootleg. You have a quarterback who can make good decisions and make accurate throws on the run. So get those wide zone runs going. Bootleg out of it if they're working. And the Patriots are able to average over 4 yards per carry in Miami. They weren't able to do this against Vegas in week 1 because they couldn't run the football. So it starts there. But get those wide zone runs going. Bootleg in the opposite direction. And then you allow Drake Maye, even though the field is cut in half, that can sometimes, you might say, well, you're not able to throw it back across the field. Number one, they did last week. They used a nice leak play, quote-unquote leak play, which is a West Coast play, to hit Austin Hooper back across the field early in that game. But it also simplifies the reads for Drake Maye. You usually have a short, intermediate, and maybe even deep option on those types of bootleg, those keeper plays in the West Coast verbiage, or he can run it. If defenders decide to stick with their coverage, there's plenty of grass for Drake Maye to attack with his legs. If they decide to come up and try to hit him behind the line of scrimmage or at it, then he can dump it off to somebody like Hunter Henry and make that accurate throw on the move like he's a shortstop running across the diamond. That, to me, is something that the Patriots will try to do the remainder of the season. They know it. That's my understanding. They know those bootlegs have to be part of their game plan on a regular basis. And so I'm not only going to tip my cap to Josh McDaniels for adding those elements, which typically aren't part of a quote-unquote Josh McDaniels offense, but having the openness to add and the adaptability to add those elements. And I'll also say pass game coordinator and tight ends coach Thomas Brown, maybe a little bit of an unsung hero in that Week 2 win for the Patriots. His background is in the West Coast. Worked for Sean McVay, was in Chicago last year and working on those same types of concepts with Caleb Williams and trying to install those in Chicago. He understands how and why those work. So having him here in New England and the ability for Josh McDaniels to tap into Thomas Brown's brain when it comes to those types of plays, to me, was critical, and we saw his influence on Sunday in Miami. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Next Pats podcast. Thanks so much again to Tyler Dunne of GoLongTD.com. Thanks to you all for watching. Thanks to you all for listening. We're going to be right back here next week with another edition of Next Pats, so keep an eye out. We'll talk to you next time.